Welcome to Get On With It, Inspiration for Life and Leadership. I'm your host, Sue MacArthur, President of Strategic Talent Management. We've all met them, the people who have a presence and a unique point of view that make us want to lean in and say, tell me more. In this podcast, we celebrate these people and provide a platform through which they can share their insights. Whether you lead a company, a community organization, or just your own life, we offer you these moments of clarity, hope, and inspiration. So let's get on with it. It is everywhere. Incivility in today's world seems more the norm than the exception. And I'm not necessarily talking about overly aggressive bullying and harassment, but often lower intensity negative behaviors, and they vary in terms of how obvious they are. These behaviors are all too common, and in the workplace, there's a measurable cost to businesses. But these issues are often difficult to address because they aren't illegal, but it doesn't make them any less awful. Dr. John O'Brien is the author of Rudeness Rehab, Reclaiming Civility in the Workplace and Your Home Space. He is also a practicing psychotherapist, a professional speaker, and he has served as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Maine at Augusta for 25 years. He has a unique perspective on the impacts of rudeness and incivility in our workplaces and in our lives in general. So let's talk about that. Joining us from Portland, Maine, a place very near and dear to my heart, welcome, Dr. O'Brien.
Thanks so much for having me, Sue. I look forward to our conversation.
Great. Well, let's start with some definitions so we're on the same page. What exactly is incivility?
So incivility is rude and inconsiderate behavior that creates stress in the person or people who are the target of the behavior, in people who witness the behavior, and even boomeranging around ultimately to the person who him or herself is being rude. So it's sort of a stress cycle that comes from this rude and inconsiderate behavior.
Mm-hmm. How did you come to study this topic? It must mean something to you if you were to spend the time studying it and writing about it.
Well, I've worked in the mental health community in Maine for almost 30 years and have helped people learn to manage symptoms of stress and cope with disorders like depression and anxiety. So I've worked for a long time helping people with coping skills. At the same time, in my own life, I have witnessed and heard clients talk about professionally this increase in rude behavior in people. And it really became clear to me when I heard Dr. Christine Porath speak in 2017 about this topic of incivility. That was like a light bulb went off for me when she was talking specifically about the negative impacts on people personally and professionally. And that kind of got me thinking. And then when we get into the pandemic, and at a time when I thought we would actually come together in a crisis, we became further divided, and people were treating frontline workers poorly and treating healthcare workers poorly. That really caught my attention. And then as that pandemic has waned, I thought, well, surely now our rude behavior will go down, but it just seems like it hasn't. It's only further escalated. And now we have this pandemic of rudeness and incivility. And so that's really what propelled me to write the book, was to teach people skills or tell people skills that they can feel more empowered for how to deal with this.
Mm-hmm. Are there different types of incivility?
I'm glad you asked. So there's three different kind of categories of incivility. There's what we probably typically think of as incivility is interpersonal incivility. When people make snarky comments about others, roll their eyes in a meeting when someone's speaking, or cut someone off, in discussion. So there's the interpersonal type of incivility. But then there's also cyber incivility, which is the type of behavior that emerges in pointed emails, nasty text messages, commentary in Zoom chat or in Slack, and certainly in social media.
Yes, my children have certainly experienced that.
Yes. And then finally, what's called victimless incivility, which is the idea of leaving a mess behind you for other people to have to clean up. So in offices, when people leave the photocopier jammed, so somebody else has to deal with that, or people leave dishes in the sink.
Hmm.
So in the community sink, so other people have to either work around them or do them themselves. I may be speaking from personal experience. But it's like the message with that is, my time is more valuable than yours. You need to clean this up. And so it's interpersonal, it's cyber, and also this category of victimless incivility.
I wouldn't have thought of the victimless thing, but now I can think of many examples, like
Yeah.
exploding the soup in the office microwave and not cleaning it up.
Right. Mhm.
So I had not thought of that before. Why do you think incivility and rudeness are so much more common in today's society? And as you said, there seemed to be a rise of that when the pandemic, and it never went away. Why? What's going on?
Well, I think there's lots of things that have come together. Um, One of which goes back to a book that was first published, I believe, in 2000, which was entitled Bowling Alone. I don't know if you've heard of this book by Robert Putnam, but basically it uses the fact that there was a continuous reduction in the number of people signing up for bowling leagues. That used to be something that really was a sense of community. People came together, and from all walks of life and all different kind of economic levels. It was this sense of community, and I think that fewer and fewer people were signing up for bowling leagues as well as other community groups. So
Mm-hmm.
people have become less connected, more in their own kind of world. You add to that the impact of politics and how our politics over the last 10 to 20 years have become increasingly divisive
Mm-hmm.
and a demonizing of people on the other side. Social media is also something that has, I think, fostered a lot of frustration and negativity. And I think also just media in general, people are being fed more information on different and choosing to listen to certain media outlets on one side of an issue or another that also then sort of creates this um, social disconnection and in many ways models uncivil behavior because on news shows and various cable companies, programs, people will be rude to each other. And it seems like that I think we've all become kind of desensitized to having that as the norm.
Right. It's not just Jerry Springer anymore. it's, a,
Exactly
it's a
right.
lot more common.
Precisely. Yeah. Right.
Right. So what impact does that have on us as human beings? What does experiencing that do to us?
Incivility and rudeness, as you said in the setup to this discussion, is something that's not as obvious. So
Mhm.
these are more subtle behaviors, but that still create stress in individuals. And that, rude and uncivil behavior is a result of stress. People get stressed and they're more likely to be emotional and more likely there to be rude.
Mhm.
But it also then is a cause of stress. So it's so that people are, um, being more rude because they're stressed, and then become more stressed because of the rudeness that they're feeling from others. So it's this kind
Right.
of vicious cycle, if you will.
Right. So in the face of rudeness and incivility, it is common to respond in kind. We fall into that trap, we lower ourselves to that level. What advice do you have for dealing with incivility in a civil manner?
Well, there's a whole lot to say about that. It's and first of all, in writing the book, I felt like it was in some ways a confessional because sometimes when people write books, they present themselves as experts and here's how to manage this, and I'm perfect myself in all of these situations. And
I would never behave that way.
exactly. And I try to make the point in the book that I'm on this journey too, and it isn't always easy. So first, be patient with yourself if this is something that you want to try to change. And again, understanding that, I mean, when I was first writing the book and talking to my editor about the process, about like why would people be motivated to try to respond differently to rudeness and incivility, you know, to say, gosh, it's the right thing to do, is not enough of a motivator.
Mhm.
But rather, if you say to people, if you get caught up in rude behavior yourself and are responding in kind, well, you're growing your stress, and you're going to bring that home to your loved ones and creating potentially more stress there, and it's bad for your health. And
Mhm.
it can create more kind of, illness longer term, et cetera. So that's kind of the idea of being motivated about why to change. I think, if you can see that, again, first staying away from responding in kind, trying to keep yourself calmer, you are going to be able to respond more effectively to people as opposed to simply react emotionally.
Mhm.
And so, I encourage people to be trying to kind of keep your wits about you in situations, because the more uncivil you become, if you get pulled into that type of behavior, well, that first of all, people can then point to your behavior as problematic, but also your position or the thing that you are the point you're trying to make gets lost because people see your quote negative behavior or emotionality. And that's the distraction from what is an important point. So I tell people it's important to be civil so that your point that you're trying to make is more clearly expressed.
Right. So you don't lose credibility.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So we've talked about how to handle it as a victim, but how about the perpetrators? I mean, we all know people who consistently behave in this manner or under stress. I'm not proud of it, but sometimes I've just flipped out and
Mhm.
behaved in an inappropriate, what I later see is an inappropriate manner. How do we recognize and rein that in?
Well, it's hard to be completely objective about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's hard also that, as you said before, when we're under stress, any of us can lose the effectiveness of our behavior. So I think it's trying to be more self-aware,
Mm-hmm.
and again, ideally, we can try to not engage in those behaviors or realize and try to catch the behaviors sometimes before they emerge.
Mm-hmm.
But if they do emerge, I think if you can catch yourself in the moment, if you hear yourself saying to someone, well, that was really stupid, or how could you do that? I mean, I don't know, but if you said, and then you realize, oh my God, did I just say that? To be able to quickly emerge and say, gosh, well, I'm sorry. I like take responsibility as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that won't be for a few hours, or a day later you reflect back and you calm down and you think, "Ooh, that was not my finest hour." You can
Right.
always go back and figure out, express your regrets, and try to
Mm-hmm.
figure out what you could do differently in the situation next time to not just simply act in your frustration.
And you have an acronym that you've talked about, BAM.
Bam! Yes.
Tell me about BAM. And we're not talking Emerald Lagasse and BAM, put the spice in here. What does BAM mean to you in
Yes, we
this
are also
incivility and rudeness world?
Yes, excuse me. We're also not talking about Marvel comics. That's where I think about Bam, like Bam,
Right.
pow, when the superhero is punching the bad guys. That skills that people can use to manage episodes of rudeness and incivility. So Bam is breathing, active listening, and mindfulness. I'll explain each briefly.
Please.
Does that sound okay?
Yes.
So breathing, the B, is abdominal breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. It goes by many labels, but basically it's breathing so that you fill the full capacity of your lungs, and that if you are really breathing deeply, that in fact when you breathe in, your stomach will go out because you're filling the lower part of your lungs and getting more oxygen in your system, which helps to lower your stress. And therefore, in the moment, that's something that can help you to center yourself. and not and so I encourage people always, especially when they're in conflict, to bring their attention to their breath and to try to take at least one or two slow abdominal breaths. Um, there's also something I would just encourage your listeners to check out. It's the work of Andrew Huberman, and it's something called the stacked physiological sigh,
Oh,
which is you take in a deep breath and then you take in so it's I'll demonstrate here just briefly. So you take in a deep breath and then you take in a second quick breath, like you and then slowly exhale. And that is a strategy that has been shown through research to quickly reset people's physiology,
hmm.
to bring a more immediate calming effect. So there's several variations on the topic of breathing, but that
Okay.
breathing has a lot of power in helping us center ourselves.
All right. How about the A? Tell me
The
more
A
about that.
is, yes, the A is active listening. So often when people are in discussion, now, of course, our discussion being the exception. So, but when people are in discussion, um, when one person is talking, the other person is already thinking about how they're going to respond,
Hmm.
as opposed to really listening to what someone's saying. So, active listening is, in fact, trying to keep your focus and attention on what the other person is saying. Of course, it involves nonverbals, which is,
Hmm.
looking at the person, nodding, showing them that you're paying attention. But also, when the person finishes talking, rather than responding with what you want to say, this is my perspective, instead saying things that encourage the other person to continue talking, saying things like, "How so?" or "What do you mean?" or say more about that. In cases where something has happened that you think is someone's been rude, the power and benefit of active listening is that you are, by saying, "Well, how so?" or "Say more about that," you're asking the person to like reflect on what they've just said, reword what they have just said, or say more. And if the person has misspoken or said something rude, reflecting that back to them, they're going to think about what they've just said. And sometimes that alone will get people to rephrase what they mean.
Hmm.
Um,
And make sure
or
that you understand completely. They may come back and say, that's not exactly what I meant.
Exactly, right? That
Mhm.
you are like, if you just go with your emotions in those situations and your emotional interpretation of what has just been said, you could run with that and then be uncivil back to them and start down this negative cycle when in fact it's all about a misunderstanding about what's been said.
Mhm.
But let's also recognize that sometimes people double down in those moments and they just continue with the rudeness. And in that case, the benefit of active listening is it's giving you time to think about what your response is going to be. It's
Mhm.
giving you time to think about, okay, nope, they really meant that. So how, like, what choice do I have and how do I want to respond?
How do I de-escalate?
Yes,
Right.
right.
And now we're at M.
M. M is for mindfulness, mindful awareness. And again, that's a whole big topic.
Mhm.
But in short, when we are mindful, we're mindful of our inner world of thoughts and feelings and what's going on internally in our body. And then we're also aware of what's going on externally with people and kind of the outer world of actions and perceptions. So it's self-awareness of our inner and outer world. But and there's so much now out there about mindful awareness, some of which I think is people find difficult to implement. They feel like it's very complicated. There's a great four-step mindfulness that I teach people, which is as simple as this: stop, breathe, reflect, and choose. So it's when you are faced with a difficult negative emotion. I didn't create this model. It's been out there. I've been exposed to it in the work of Terry Freilich, who's a local mindfulness expert. But when you are faced with a difficult or intense emotion that you know is likely to derail your behavior into something ineffective, if you know, okay, when I get angry or I get frustrated, I'm more likely to behave in uncivil ways. When you start to get angry, stop, Going back to the breathing we talked about before, reflect, like we're saying, on, okay, what are my choices in this moment? What's my old habit? What do I want to try to do differently? And then try to make the choice about how you want to act. So having that acronym helps people slow down, be more aware of what they're doing, and think about how to respond effectively.
That's great. What a great tool. I'm going to use that.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
So we've been talking about rudeness and incivility in a general way. Let's pivot a bit and talk about the impacts on the workplace. So I was just happened to get SHRM's HR quarterly magazine the other day, and there was an article about incivility. And they said that their civility index for Q4 of 2024 showed that the financial impact to businesses of incivility in the workplace is over $1.6 billion per day. Yes, that is billion with a B, and that is per day. That would indicate that this is pretty prevalent. What is the incidence of incivility in workplaces?
Well, in the work of Dr. Christine Porath, who I spoke of earlier, she's done a significant amount of research on the incidence of incivility in the workplace. And when she began to gather data in 2005 and asked workers in a variety of professions if they had seen episodes of incivility in their workplace, 50%, 50% said that they had experienced an episode of incivility at least once in the past month in their workplace.
In the past month.
In the past month. That was 2005. When she repeated it in 2022, that number was 76%.
Wow.
And 70% of people said that they had experienced rude and uncivil behavior in their workplace 3 or more times in the last month. So it's something that's been rising in workplaces. I've seen that, yeah, the SHRM reports on the negative impact. And I think there was something that recently came out also about leading up to like the first 3 months of 2025, and seeing that also there continues to be this escalation of conflict in the workplace, specifically around political discussions or around what are seen as hot topics of kind of discrimination, minority issues, gender issues, that it's something that is very prevalent in our society, and many people, obviously it emerges in workplaces.
What does it mean to businesses? What's the impact?
This is just an interesting factoid, but that does relate, that if you go into Amazon and you try to do a search on the word incivility, it autocorrects to invisibility, which I think is rather interesting.
Even Amazon doesn't recognize it as a problem.
Yeah. Right. So I think it's a great metaphor for what's going on societally, but I think it's also what has gone on in businesses, that there are these invisible effects that they don't realize. But when there's higher levels of incivility in the workplace, teams don't function as effectively. There's people don't have a sense of kind of psychological safety, of feeling okay about contributing ideas in team meetings or asking questions or seeking feedback. They're less likely to be, again, collaborative on a project. People, if they have experienced some rude behavior on the part of a colleague, a lot of times they're then distracted at work as well as outside of work about how they're going to, like, what just happened and how they're going to get back at the person. So that gets in the way of their ability to be productive and focused. Some people also just end up engaging in quiet quitting, especially if they're getting incivility from a boss or a superior, that they're going to actually reduce their effort at work, and sometimes using time at work to sort of look for another job. And that then leads to the whole cost that businesses face when there's a lot of employee turnover.
Right. All of those things go into that astounding number.
Yeah.
This brings to mind, I was talking to someone the other day, and they said that they were planning to leave their job. And when I asked them why, Their only response was, "There's not an ounce of humanity in this organization."
Wow.
And I said, "What are you prepared to do about that?" And she said, "Nothing. I'm just going to leave."
Hmm. Yes.
So it's huge. And but businesses don't always know it because she's not going to say anything about it. She's not going to bring it up in the exit interview. She doesn't want any more conflict.
Yes. Yep. And I think that's the thing, is that people get demoralized,
Mm-hmm.
disconnected, and therefore there's a decline in their productivity, and people don't feel as if the organization cares about them, so
Mm-hmm.
they get more disengaged. Um, and you know, sometimes organizations are actually committed to trying to have civil work environments, and so there are resources through HR or through supervisors where people can get some help in changing a dynamic. But sometimes, as this person is saying, the organization just has a toxic work culture, and the only solution you have is just to leave.
So here's another scenario. I'm sure we've all seen this before. There's a great performer. They get the job done, they do good work, but they're horrible people to work with. They get a pass on their bad behavior because they're producing. Let's talk about that. What do we do?
Well, in one thing that just of interest is these people in healthcare. I mean, that historically, I think there's been people in certain positions in healthcare who have been highly reactive, very emotional, and I think the stereotype of surgeons, um,
Mm-hmm.
is
Bedside manner
something.
is not part of the program.
Right. And that the thought was, well, it really, I mean, the patient is, mostly sedated and out of it, so that doesn't really matter to the patient. And so as long as they have good surgical technique, that's fine. But there is research now that shows that people, patients whose surgeons are uncivil are more at risk for complications post-surgery, medical errors, and have a higher risk of mortality as a result of surgery.
Hmm.
So in healthcare and hospitals, they're starting to pay attention to this, because when you look at quality measures, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have more people, dying or having medical errors, that's not good for their quality scores. And so that has motivated healthcare organizations to take this issue more seriously.
I wonder why that is. I'm thinking maybe it's the impact on the team that the surgeon works with. They don't work in a bubble.
Well, in other words, why these effects of
Right.
the
May they not be working at their peak performance because of this behavior. Interesting
oh,
to think about.
yeah, absolutely. No, people are less likely to want to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
If they see something, they're not going to say anything. They're less likely to, because if they just feel as if they're going to be poorly treated, or maybe they have in the past, they
Mm-hmm.
don't. Um,
Right.
and their stress level is up, and so that's when people are more likely to make medical errors, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So that's specific to healthcare. In broad terms, when it comes to businesses, and you have someone who's an exceptional individual contributor, sometimes organizations, I think, are afraid that if they you know, get rid of this person, or what's this going to mean for the organization? And they think only in terms of the financial benefit that this person is providing.
Mm-hmm.
What they're not thinking about are the other financial costs to keeping this person at the organization. And like you were talking about before with the SHRM research about the staggering costs per day of incivility in workplaces. And that's the invisible part that I think organizations have to pay more attention to.
Right. Yes, it's driving absenteeism and turnover and low productivity and all of those things. I was astounded by those numbers.
Yes, yeah.
What could the leaders who are listening to this podcast do about incivility in their workplaces or even in their personal lives? What actions can they take?
Well, I would say first to assess themselves. I mean, as leaders, you know, it starts with self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And just like you and I were talking about, recognizing that, none of us are perfect and understanding what stress-related negative behaviors different leaders have. I think um, I often in my work with leaders will get them to think about, okay, like who are you at your worst? Nobody likes to think about
Mm.
that, but I think it is important. Like, what happens for you when you get stressed? And we all have them. What are your stress-related negative behaviors? So I encourage leaders to think about that through the lens of incivility. How is that likely to emerge? And to begin by trying to be more aware of changing whatever behaviors may exist for them personally. And because they think it's one thing if you say that you want to create a more civil workplace and that this is important, but you're not doing that yourself,
Mm-hmm.
then people aren't going to take it seriously. So I think modeling the behavior that you want, clarifying expectations of what you want in the workplace, and then as a leader, you have to think about how to coach people who are engaging in rude behavior from the perspective first that they may understand the impact of their behavior. That's the other piece we haven't talked about is that
Mm.
sometimes, a lot of times when people are being rude or uncivil, it's like they don't have the self-awareness to understand they're coming across that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes a leader coaching one of their direct reports around their behavior um, can be helpful in getting them to change.
Mm-hmm.
But also then if they don't, setting up what are the consequences going to be? As a leader, how much, like we were saying before, if you have an individual contributor who's contributing a great deal, are you going to keep them on and let them engage in that behavior? Or are you going to somehow have consequences up to and including asking them to leave? If you see it as what kind of organization do I want to create? What kind of environment is this going to be? Um, and that it is not just, oh, we're doing this because it's a warm, fuzzy environment. No, because it's actually better for business and it's going to reduce the costs. So those would be the things I'd encourage leaders to consider.
If what's the biggest takeaway that you hope listeners will pay attention to and after listening to this podcast will keep thinking about?
Well, I would say the two takeaways. I
Okay.
like to color outside the lines. So is
That's
that okay?
fine. If two, three, give us what you got.
Well, I hope that this discussion helps people to become more aware of what I think still is an invisible but powerful pandemic that we're having in terms of
Mm-hmm.
rudeness. People have become desensitized to it or just think that it's just kind of it's part of the way we communicate societally without recognizing the negative impact that it's having. So that's one piece I would encourage people to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Second is in my discussions with people, and when I talk about, rudeness and incivility, most, if not all people are concerned about the rise in incivility in our society and absolutely want change, but they want other people to change.
Ah, excellent point.
Right? They think,
It's not me.
yeah, it's not me, right? And that's the thing is that each of us needs to take responsibility for ourselves and our behavior, um, and encourage that behavior by exhibiting that behavior. Hopefully, we can then encourage that behavior in others. And I think, therefore, also for the people that we sort of support in our work lives, in our personal lives, people that we vote for in politics, trying to make sure that we are supporting people who are exhibiting more civil behavior because we recognize it's something that's the best thing for our society.
Well, the incivility we're experiencing doesn't seem to be working very well. So that's excellent advice. And I love the idea of modeling good behavior. But I do think we sometimes don't look at ourselves and recognize when we're the problem.
Yes. Well, and let's face it, it isn't easy. It
No.
does take a lot of courage and self-assurance, I think, to be able to recognize, okay, I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers, but also, and recognizing when we slip into old behavior, if you can accept that this is an oops, and just try to get yourself back on track or take responsibility as soon as you can. Hitting the reset button. There's always the chance for a new start.
Great. John, thank you so much. I've learned so much, and I'm going to be much more mindful about my own behavior and how I respond to that in others. It's been really wonderful to have you here, and such great information. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Sue. I really enjoyed our discussion.
I really enjoyed my time with Dr. O'Brien, and he is someone who just exudes kindness and civility. So he's the perfect person to talk about that. If you'd like to learn more about his book or even purchase it, you can visit the website rudenessrehab.com. And to contact Dr. O'Brien or learn more about him and his coaching services, you can visit his website at activatesuccess.org. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.